Since I'm originally a philosopher, before I became a film critic, I was thinking a little bit about the concept of this evening, which is, I don't know if the singular of Streitgespräche is Streitgespräch, but anyway, it will be kind of a debate that's a bit more than a debate or a discussion, but where we are gonna celebrate the art of disagreeing. And disagreeing is actually something that philosophers and film critics have in common. So I'm going to propose some thoughts to you and also to the two of you to maybe help us understand what we're gonna do here, because I'm not so much interested in antagonism and polarizing, so maybe we can also find other ways to disagree or to explore what actually it means to disagree and agree. And before coming here, earlier I was watching Kelly Reichardt's First Cow at the Berlinale, and there's a little moment in that film where two friends figure out there is a cow in their neighborhood, hence the title. And then one of them he's a cook, and he's saying, "Oh, I wish I had some milk because I could make butter cookies." And then his friend, who is from China, says, "Well, I don't drink milk. Milk doesn't agree with me." And I really like this English saying, because also it means like milk doesn't become you. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you are in a disagreement with the milk on some kind of a subject, or you have a difference of opinion, but that maybe also it doesn't become you very well. And this idea of a film becoming you, or that has probably more to do actually with understanding than with opposition. But I'm gonna propose some more thoughts to you, because I think philosophy and criticism are both the places of disagreement, and we can see disagreement as a concept, as a phenomenon, but also as a practice. And I think tonight we can sort of celebrate or engage in the practice of disagreeing. And what can we disagree about? We can disagree about real things, about facts, but we can also disagree about apparent things, and then we're maybe talking more about tastes and opinions. And this is, I think, the field where film critics are working, because we're talking about not so much about facts, because that would also mean that there is kind of an objective truth about cinema. There are facts in cinema, but maybe there's not so much objective truth about cinema. So maybe we're talking more about tastes and opinions and context, and finally understanding. As critics in our works, in our analytical part of the work, we're questioning, disputing, objecting, opposing. We're also begging to differ, which is a very actually nice way, because then we're maybe having differences, but we're begging to differ. So to start with this debate, I'm not going to talk much, because basically you're going to do all the work and I'm the referee. Maybe I should have positioned myself in the middle, but I don't think that'll be necessary. I wanted to ask you if there are certain topics that you feel like we really need to discuss tonight. Questions, topics, ideas that came up after watching two of the films, so that we don't forget about them. So, Senem, is there anything you feel like that's really important not to miss tonight?
And I think maybe one of the first topics we can engage with is about why these two films are together, like in order to maybe start a dialogue between the two films, because on a first look they seem quite different from each other, but maybe one of the topics that we could get them together into a conversation is maybe the ghostly presence of the past, as we also talked before. Because in the first movie, it's about this Brazilian guy who got beaten up by police or not, like some forces, and that night the ghost of that night haunts him for the rest of his life. So he's stuck in that moment. And in the second film, there's also the ghosts of the tradition of ancestors, of the roots of the culture, which is kind of haunting or like coming back. So that's one of the topics that pop into my mind. That
we can start with. So this is actually where the two films are maybe agreeing on. Wilfred, can you point out the differences and see where these two films don't agree about the ghost of the past? What is different about them in their approach?
Thank you very much, first of all. So they both deal with ghosts of the past, like you rightly pointed out, and but where I feel like they diverge at some point is where the first one, that's the Brazilian film, has to do with very how to put it, real. He experienced stuff, and it's physical, and it's not just physical, it's left him with scars, traumatic scars. The other film is not so much physical as it manifests in the spiritual world, in the psychologic realm. And even though we find that eventually he finally, transforms and becomes, but for the longest of times, it's more like a mental kind of displacement. So he's not the only one going through it. His family is going through it. His wife is going through it. The people who surround him are going through it. So I feel like, that's a good point where like they diverge. And even though as much as they diverge, they eventually kind of meet, at some point, later, as we saw in both films.
Can you elaborate a little bit about how you feel they meet again? I mean, I know this is not disagreeing, but it's a good point to bring up.
Yeah, I feel like they meet because from the first, let's start with the first film. We assume this guy is the only one who's gone through this. He's had police violence. He's had, extrajudicial violence inflicted on him. But like he narrates in the story, his mother is also, traumatized by this. His family, he can't go home. He leaves home and, he's afraid to go back. The same thing with Raymond from Okoroshi, who at some point leaves home too, and his wife has to go around Lagos chasing after him and, picking up sort of the pieces of so we see that, I don't know if both films have that intention, but we see that we have this lives of young men, at the center, and then at the periphery, sort of, there's the woman who has to, who's left behind and who has to follow up after him. So in one case is the mother, and the other case is the wife. Yeah, so and I feel like
they are male-centered.
They are
you shouldn't agree with that.
This is definitely a topic that we're gonna address later. But let me stick with you, Wilfred, for a while, because you're from Nigeria. You maybe have some background knowledge about the lost Okoroshi that might be helpful for us to at least contextualize the film a bit better.
Okay, I feel like, is Abba here?
Yeah, Abba is here, and
okay, so
he has no mic.
So maybe a background knowledge of the film industry in Nigeria. It's some of you may know it as Nollywood. Nollywood is like what, it's a convenient, obviously taken after Hollywood. It's a convenient like word or description of the entire film industry, but it doesn't really describe it, because people who in Nigeria also describe Nollywood as like a genre of film. So it's not just the industry, it's also a genre. So we are an industry, we are a country that is filmmaking wise, we're steeped in video and television. So for the longest times we didn't have any cinemas. There were cinemas, and then there was this structural adjustment program that we went through when oil prices fell, because we're an oil nation. Oil prices fell sometime in the 80s, and everybody had to tighten up, and all the cinemas, disappeared. So people who were born after that had no cinema knowledge. We were not going to theaters when I was born. For the longest of years, all our entertainment came either on television or on video, direct to video. So that's how Nollywood, so to speak, was born sometime in the 90s, maybe 92, 94, where some guy, he's not even a filmmaker, he was a businessman, an Igbo businessman, because one thing about the Igbo people, they are industrious. That's one of the, they will, they know how to make money. I'm Igbo, by the way, so so I know what I'm saying.
But you're a film critic.
But yeah, so I'm the wrong kind of Igbo. I don't know how it happened, So anyway, so this businessman, he was importing, tapes, and he had these empty tapes that he imported. He didn't know how to sell them, so he just had like a brainwave. Why don't I record something on them, and it'd be easier to sell. He just wanted to sell stuff. So they came together and recorded a film, Living in Bondage. That's the film, which recently had a remake last year. More cinema, more, So anyway, they came together. He came together, brought some young people together. They, did this film, and it became very, very popular. The thing about representation, people want to see themselves. Because before that, we were hooked on Mexican soaps, on Hollywood, films, Indian films, Bollywood. So just that novelty of seeing, people that look like you doing stuff on the screen, and it was very popular. He sold lots of copies of the film, and lots of people copycats or it influenced lots of films. So tragically, the influence wasn't cinema, it was more like video. So everybody was doing that same thing, and we're calling it film. It wasn't until like 2000, the year 2002, that the first another cinema, the first real cinema now reopened in my lifetime, 2002. And then filmmakers had to start adjusting to how to make films for that format. And it's an ongoing education. You maybe Netherlands, you have like decades of history. We just have like maybe 10, 20 years. So this film, like The Lost Okoroshi, isn't the mainstream. It's not Nollywood per se. It's more like there's also like a wave of filmmakers who, some of them trained abroad. A lot of them were influenced by European films, Hollywood films also, who like to do things differently. So, and as you can see from Abba's film, which is why I'm sure it was programmed for this. So it's like, it's out of the mainstream. So it would struggle a bit to get a wide audience, in Nigeria. Yeah.
Before I'm gonna ask you if it's easier to understand the cinema when you have all this background information. I mean, Senem, do you know anything about this? And did you research? Is it helpful?
Yeah. I know. Of course, I heard about Nollywood. But on our way to here, I was asking him, because I know the concept from the in the beginning of 2000s when I was studying film, like from our world cinema history classes, and I was like, is Nollywood still a thing? So I know it in the video times, but
it's the thing.
Yeah. So I don't have the update information. But like from not only from film, but through this like theoretical background of the post-colonial studies and whatsoever, I have a vague idea about the concepts that the film is trying to deal as well.
So, Wilfred, is it useful to have background information in understanding this film?
Yes and no. Yes, because I tell people who programmers who are interested in programming African films that it's sometimes it's helpful to understand where we're coming from, because it's easy to say I just want good films, give me good films, and good films by whose standards, who's making these films, who is determining what is good. But if you as a programmer understand where these cultures are coming from and why some of these films present the way that they do, it will perhaps help inform your programming decisions. And also as a film critic, it will help understanding the films better, seeing them in a little more light, in a more different light. And I'm not saying you should lower your standards when you're programming films coming from this part of the world. I'm just saying that it helps if you know some of the background, of these countries. Yeah.
You also said no, and this is where, of course, we all get really excited, because that means that you also disagree with yourself.
Yes.
So why is it also maybe not helpful to have the background information?
No, because it's a film. At the end of the day, it's cinema. So, like, I like. Personally, I like the less I know about the film before I see it, the better. I want to be surprised. I want to be wowed. I want to be, whatever. So I think that at the end of the day, the same standards should be adjudged to all films. So look at the film for what it is, judge it for what it is, appraise it for what it is, program it for what it is, and then the discussions can follow up later.
Senem.
No, I was thinking about treating it like, let's say, equally with other films. But would you, for instance, compare this film with the Mask with Jim Carrey, or like with a superhero film, like the last Spider-Man that you show? Because it is actually kind of a superhero film. With the mask gets on your face, like it happens to Jim Carrey as well. But when you're watching the film, you don't particularly. I don't know if you have remembered some of those films while you were watching, but actually they're on the same genre. But you don't do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's more like of our history of cinema. So our history of cinema tends to be Western, tends to be would I say European, American, and that's like the history that a lot of film critics have. It doesn't matter where you're working with, whether you're working in Africa, you're working in Nigeria, or in Turkey, or in Europe. So that's why I say, like, for you to also appreciate these films, but you have to like update. So the knowledge, Western history is here, African history maybe not so documented, or maybe not so studied. So that's what I feel like. Cinema can be all kinds of things, and if we could just open our minds to what could be and what could come, that's why festivals like Berlin are exciting. The various sections, you tend to see all kinds of things that mess with the idea of cinema itself. So I feel like we should make room for, to appreciate. Don't just judge a film or judge a piece of work just based on the limited, or not limited, because your knowledge could be extensive, but based on just that knowledge you have. You have a PhD, no? No. Okay. But you are like you said philosopher?
Yeah, I came from philosophy, but that basically means nothing.
Oh, okay. So if you came from philosophy, you understand that knowledge is extensive and nobody knows it all. So as a critic, as a programmer, also as a film lover, you should be interested in continuously updating
When you said earlier, like at the end of the day, it's a film, and you just apply the same standards to it, and then you wanted to say something, and then I thought, okay, now we're getting to the heart of it, because can you apply the same standards to every film? No. So elaborate, explain.
It is hard, but it's really hard to explain, and it's not easy to maybe simplify in a few words. But of course, like in every relationship you get into with a film, the context tells you things. Like you are prone to some things. Like it's because of your the history of your viewing experience as well. Like you have seen, I don't know, we have seen in, let's say, generally speaking, thousands of American films, thousands of European films, but how many Nigerian films have you seen before? And you know that the colors are different, even the colors are different, so it's kind of a different aesthetic, different acting, and like you have your habitual things that you even try to like wash yourself of. You have them, you have your expectations, and so on and so forth. So start with it, so you are aware of the fact that you are watching a Nigerian film, a Brazilian film, whatsoever. Yeah, and I'm not strictly speaking in the national cinema terms, but it is like culturally coded. So starting from that, of course, you don't treat every film equally, and especially I think it's always find it hard to when I'm engaging with, for instance, Turkish films, because I know that I don't treat them the same way that I treat the films of like other cultures, because I'm like living inside it, breathing with it. So I have kind of I have a different relationship with it. So those kinds of things always affect you.
But how is that relationship different? I mean, how do you treat them differently? Nicer?
Sometimes nicer, sometimes harsher. It depends, I think. But it is kind of different. It's like the food that your mother does, kind of thing. Like you're used to it, so you have a different relationship with it.
So I like that you mentioned.
No, you can't like her.
No, I want to.
But
I want to divert. Yeah, but you said we should. So polite. So I like that you mentioned that, because that always comes up all the time back home when we critique, Nigerian films, and there's a tendency, and Abba might, there's a tendency to want to apply different standards, to how you approach, and I tell them all the time, it's not. I understand that, but it's number one, it's not for you to tell me how to approach it, and number two, I understand that I constantly deal with that, at the back of my mind, but it's not going to help you if you say, treat our films differently. Because now Abba's film is here, tomorrow you also want your film to be in Cannes or in Berlin or in Toronto or whatever. And cinema is cinema, so there's a language to it, there's an aesthetic to it, there's a structure to it, just broadly speaking. And then the next thing, it's a lazy argument, and they're like, of course, this film was made for $10 million, my film was made for like 500,000, and I'm like, yeah, it's money, but it's not money. That's really not the issue. You when you see a film, a good film, it doesn't matter how much it costs. You can tell if the director has something to say. You can tell if the actors have something to put across. And then when you see films that, even if you get 100 million and gave it to this director, he'll just make a more expensive piece of rubbish. So sorry, not
go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a constant challenge. How do you, especially for us back home, we have an industry that we don't really have an industry. So we're trying to develop, something. We're trying to get people to cinemas to watch films, and we're trying to retain them when they come. But you also want to do things that, would outlast you, hopefully. You want to make work that is good. And to do that requires engagement. So if I apply different standards like you expect me to, I will tell you your film is good for a Nigerian film. What is that anyway? When you go to Berlin, nobody cares what a Nigerian film looks like. They know that a film is good because a film is good. So it's like a constant back and forth that we have all the time. I don't know if it will stop.
But how about the cultural colonization thing? Like when there is a Nigerian film presented to the European eyes, what happens there in that relationship? I'm sorry, I was asking a question.
I don't know. I don't understand the question.
So it's like, yeah, I think it matters. Yeah, kind of.
Okay. Yeah. I get it. I get you now. Yeah. What does that mean anyway?
Yeah, or I don't know. Not anyway. Like what? No, I'm really interested in how can we elaborate on that?
Yeah, or how do you feel about the Nigerian film being presented in an international film festival? I mean, this film also played at the Toronto Film Festival, where I saw it first. And then will people say, "Oh, it's quite good for a Nigerian film"? Yes. Maybe I should do the nasty questions.
Yeah, so you don't want that. I'm sure Abba doesn't want that when people say, "Oh, I saw your film is good for a Nigerian film." That's praise, but is it really praise? Would you say First Cow is good for an American? Is she American? Yeah, she's American. Yeah. First Cow is good for an American film. It's like a compliment, but it's backhanded. And so that's what, these guys need to learn, that film is film. And in as much as we make allowances, we don't judge two films on the same level. And it's not just between Turkish and Nigerian films. Between two Hollywood films, you won't judge Joker the same way you would judge Promising Young Woman, for instance. One is an independent film, one is, a studio big budget film. So in as much as a critic, you want to tell yourself, or as a programmer, that there's a standard for, how you select films. But, deep down within you, I guess it's harder to articulate, but it's just not the same.
I think here we are really at the core, at the heart of how film criticism in itself is a disagreeing practice, because it's self-reflexive and you're constantly asking these questions to yourself, like when it comes to judgment or values or those kind of things, and to the thumbs up or down or the star system and stuff like this. And this is where you're, as a critic, constantly navigating, like, what are these standards? Do I have to define them with every film that I'm writing or talking about, or are there kind of objective standards? How does that work for you? I have an idea already that you're more of into kind of a cultural relativism or not, but how does it work for you? Are you believing in objective standards, and what could they be? And if you would have to apply them to these films, what would you look at? I mean, when we take examples for the films, what would be the objective good or bad or conflicting things about them?
I don't. I think it's not easy to answer that question. But the way I write, let's say, the way I see film criticism, is kind of a continuation of your experience and like cognitive and sensual experiences, and to try to not to leave the film alone after it's ended like a wasted product, but to take it and give it a dialogue and take it back and let it talk with other texts, other films, other arts whatsoever, and to keep that conversation. So I don't really have those objectives, or I don't even very much go into liking or disliking, successful, unsuccessful kind of thing, but try to continue the conversation that the film started kind of way. So
Yeah, so when I first started, I remember they used to talk, when I first started working as a critic, they used to talk about being objective as a journalist, as a film critic, you have to be objective. But, you know, within the last 2, 3, 4 years, it's changed. It's moving away from objectivism. So, it's like that battle has been lost. So how objective can you be when you're writing about a film? It's how you perceive the film, individual, which is why 3 of us could write reviews of these films and we have totally different, even though we might, agree at some point. And I'm happy that it's shifting from, or it's shifted rather, from objectivism to more like, what does this film say to you? And in this time that you saw it, in this period, at this particular moment, or whatever it is that you're going through. So there's a lot of allowance now for even for film critics to bring in yourself into the film. What does this film say to you? Sometimes I pitch reviews and I don't like doing it, but I have to stress, as a Nigerian, I would be able to appreciate this because, and editors want to see that, maybe 10 years ago it wouldn't have happened because they're like, just tell us, what was the film like? And so the standards the techniques have changed, the modules of engagement have changed. And critics are moving along with it, and I'm sure that even Dana, because when I was in the talent, that was something that came up, a lot.
We have to do a little bit of a disclosure. We knew each other before from this other festival that's going on here in Berlin, somewhere far away. It's something called Talent Press. Go ahead.
Okay, so so even that's has come up so many times. But be that as it may, there are things you should look out. Everybody says you should look out for when you're looking at the acting, you're looking at the screenwriting, you're looking at the directing, the cinematography. These things don't really change. These things are there. They are the elements that make up the film. So when you get those out of the way, it now comes to the social, the political, the cultural, the personal context.
Great. So now we're going to leave the meta level again. Now that we've sort of established that there is that the practice of film criticism is a constant navigating and negotiating these things, and therefore it's kind of in disagreement with itself constantly. Now we can maybe go back to the films and talk a little bit about the things you take from them, and that you feel these are the conversation points I would want to pursue and bring into the world.
Okay, should we start with 7 years in May?
Let's start with 7 years in May.
I will I'll try to disagree with myself. So it is kind of like a 3 episodic film. Like there is this reenactment in the beginning, and there's this long monologue in between, and then there's this game in the end. So it's like it's in 3 parts, and I should admit that I have seen the film before, and this is like I'm seeing it again, and so watching it a second time always gives you a better way to think about the film,
or not.
Or not. And I realized, because the first time, I'm going to be very open here, honest. The first time I watched the film, I couldn't really get into the monologue, and it was like too long. And I really I zoned out. I started daydreaming. I do that a lot. That's another issue. But so I couldn't really keep up with what the story he was telling me, although it was like a very strong story. And today, while I was watching, I thought to myself that I think that's more or less how it goes in real life as well. If like someone who I just met started giving me a 20 minutes monologue, I wouldn't listen to him as well, because we need at least a little bit information and establishment in the beginning. I think what the film kind of lacks is that he goes to that very quickly, and he doesn't establish much, because it took me a second time to really fully understand kind of what was going on. Maybe it's only about me.
I'm going to interrupt you and say
disagree.
that I don't agree with you
great.
at all. Because once the monologue started, I was in. And this is where the personal comes, into play, and the cultural. And because I live in Lagos, Lagos is a city where we deal with police violence every day.
Hello, I'm coming from Turkey. I'm not that.
Okay, so
they have some stories there.
Maybe for men, I don't know. So every day you leave your house and you're at home, you're outside at night, you're worried. Getting home, am I going to be stopped by the cops or the police? What are they going to do to me? Every day there's that constant fear. Once you're out by 8 o'clock, my mom is calling, come home. So I could not relate to that, and I've had friends who were, who've been victims of this, and it's ended terribly for some people. People have lost their life. So I don't think that because of where I'm coming from and because of that background, it's real. Every day on Twitter we're trending hashtags and SARS. SARS is like the branch of police that is most notorious for these things. Every day there's a hashtag and SARS, stop killing our boys. And so when I saw that, I could relate, with it was quite a powerful film for me, and I don't think I needed any background. I think it was quite effective.
But I kind of agree. No, but I'm particularly talking about form, by the way. Yeah, and I totally agree with you about the content. And when you're into it, you get that in the end. But I think like the first reenactment, I think we need a more be directed. I would be more pleased if the director directed us more into that speech. Then I would be more comfortable there listening to him. But maybe that's what he was trying to do, by the way, and you never know. So because maybe he wanted us to be lost and just be there. But I really like the concept of the film, that it all takes place in a very condensed time space. And that moment like really shot his whole life in that area, in that time zone. So I like that claustrophobic time and space notion of the film. That worked for me. And the last episode, again, I have a quite... That doesn't work for me kind of as well. I think it's like too allegorical.
And then Wilfred will know that I always say, like, when people say it doesn't work for me, then I say why and how and what did you figure out the second time that you were watching it that maybe it started to work. So what's happening there, or what were you thinking the first time? What's happening there?
Like after listening to him for a very long time, and we don't have the information, as if he's talking to us, as if he's talking to someone else, as if he's talking to by choice, and then we realize that someone is listening to him, and that story is actually kind of a replica of his own story. That's how we try to start to expand to think that, okay, this is a story not about a particular person, but of a society, or even more of other societies as well. So I think in the end, when you see like this crowd of people playing like dead and alive, it's kind of an allegorical gameful part that comments on his story. But I think it's too explanatory, I should say. That's why I couldn't relate.
And how did that then maybe change the second time, or not? It didn't change at all. Is there anything else we need to discuss about this film?
Maybe I also like that he put some of the, will I say, burden on the audience or the people. So when the guy says, when the police was beating you, how many of your neighbors, stood up for you? That was, it was like a way of balancing it out, in that, people most times do not know when to stand up for their rights, and people, think that things will not get to you, but it always gets to you eventually. The moment you let one person go, it has a way of coming around, and I like that that was spelled out.
One more thing, I again, the first time and before starting watching the film, I didn't read anything, so I didn't know anything about the film. But then later on, I learned that the actor who's playing is the real person that lived through that, and he is kind of reenacting his own story. I think that quite makes a difference while watching the film as well. So I didn't know even if it was
Yeah, and there's that. Speaking of that, so there's like a sub-genre, sub-cinema of getting people reenacting their stories, and that brings another level of how much of this is okay. I know it came out when we were in Locarno, the Pedro Costa film Vitalina Varela, and it's like getting this woman who's a black woman. You're walking with her together, but she's like regurgitating her past trauma. She lost her husband, and some form of how do you put it? What's the word now?
Exploitation.
Well, maybe not exploitation.
That's really
close. Yeah, so it's maybe ethically. So there's an ethical. It's good to put these things out there, but at what point does it become just somebody privileged gazing into something that they can never really fully understand? So
even though I don't think Pedro Costa is the right person to maybe
true,
kind of unethical, but it's a good point to bring up, because are ethical issues important at all? Because I guess you can sort of like a film for its aesthetics, and then you can analyze it and you can get into the interpretation. Usually ethical issues are the first that come to mind when people have problems or conflicts or disagree with the film. So is it important for you to know these kind of backgrounds of a film?
I'll disagree with myself. I'll say yes and no. Sometimes it's so you're not part of that cycle, or so sometimes it may be better to know, and so how to make your own decisions, how to make more sound decisions on what you would do with the film or what you would do about the film. And sometimes no, because it's a film, like I said before. You just want to fall in without any of the hype and any of the background, and you just want to appreciate it based on your own, based on what you're seeing. So it's yes and it's no.
Did you ever have experience where you enjoyed, were intrigued, whatever, by a film, and then found out some more information about it and you changed your mind?
I think so. I can't remember the film now. It's happened to me, yes, but I want to. Sorry, if I remember it, I will. Maybe you should go.
I'm not sure. Is it like, I don't know?
No, because when we are talking about reenactments and
yeah, but I guess it's basic. A lot of the Hollywood films, that because that's what we grew up on, and we were told these were the great films. Driving Miss Daisy, Gone with the Wind, and watching them now, and I'm like, okay, maybe they were not the best representation of whatever it is they were trying to. So yeah, sure, that happens.
This is also where history is changing.
So I find that I have
films
some
are changing.
Like when the whole Green Book debate came out, I enjoyed Green Book, but when people were like, oh, it's a white savior movie, I'm like, you know what you're asking me to do? If you're telling me to hate Green Book because it's a white savior movie, you're asking me to go back to 50 years of movie going history and hate like half of everything that I've loved before, and it's a difficult ask. So I didn't want to engage, with that on that level. But yeah, it's.
But it happens. I think it's the same with being a woman as well.
No, I mean this is
You have
kind
to
of
delete.
you have to kind of really walk the thin line here. But the reason I'm also asking this is because before we talked a little bit about kind of the male-centeredness and the masculine tone of both films, and we're now also talking about representation. So in a way, there's maybe also some things to be said about the representation of the women in the Lost Okoroshi, or the use of stereotypes in that film. So to what extent do these things bother you, for instance? Or you, because you brought it up.
I really am not sure, because it's like, because of the tone of the movie, it's kind of like every character is kind of stereotyped in a way. So it's kind of, they don't stand out. But of course it's this is a story from the male perspective and centered around male characters, and the women are only like side characters. But that's like it's a problem, but it's kind of very common as well. So I'm not sure if I have a problem about I was thinking about it as well, about the way the women are represented. I don't know. It's not easy always. What do you think?
I also don't know. I mean, stereotypes are also part of a comedic genre and a comedic tradition. And when you talk about masquerades, it's all about exaggeration. The only thing I was wondering about is, are there any female masquerades? Because I really
or are masquerades gendered to begin with?
Yeah.
They're all male?
Like most things, in this world, but there are
so old, maybe. Before patriarchy.
Yeah, but they're because where I come from, we have this masquerade tradition in my village, and it's male. It's male.
No female masquerade?
When they're passing, women shouldn't even be outside, because if they see you, they flog you. And I don't know why they do that, but yeah. But I think I've read about masquerades that were female from way back then. So at some point, the patriarchy came and took over everything, like they do, like we always do.
Change the stories, maybe even.
Yeah, yes. But masquerade, the whole idea in Igbo land, masquerade and women are like, when a woman sees a masquerade, she runs away. She shouldn't be like. Yeah, it's like this like that is male,
Could it have happened in this film? Because I assume that the way the masquerades are used in this film are also maybe not so realistic, because they're also used for a certain purpose. So could in this film there have been women have been masquerades? Would that have been, or would that have fit into the code of the style of the film?
Yeah, I think it could work.
Abba, why didn't you do that?
I think it could work. Just I'm curious. Now you mentioned, I didn't think about it before, but why not?
These are the nice
but that would have
questions.
It would have probably been a different film, But yeah.
Yeah, or maybe not.
Or maybe not.
No, the last person who wakes up, like the second one that we know it's going to go, that could have been a woman.
I agree with you. And what are the chances that
we changed the ending?
And what are the chances that two guys who work together, both have this same experiences? So, yeah, a woman should have, maybe the wife.
Because actually, I'm really serious. I mean, it sounds a little bit like a joke, but this is also the activity, I think, of a critic. Like you constantly ask questions to a film and try to go beyond like the status quo and think like, okay, but could it have been a woman, or would it have been out of the ordinary, and why would it have been out of the ordinary? And that's also a way to navigate these disagreements. But let's go back a little bit to this point of masculinity. Do you find it problematic? Is that why you brought it up, or no?
Let's skip this.
Let's skip this.
No, I don't have much to
to add to that.
Yeah.
Then there's another kind of controversial subject in the Lost Okoroshi, and I think this is also the way that there's dealt with colonialism and post-colonialism and ethnicity and tribal culture. Do we need to have some background information on that, or do you have questions?
Maybe about language, you could explain. So is English the... sorry to ask you that, I really don't know. Is English the common language where people... Because there are many different languages, right?
Yeah.
So is it the common... in Nigeria?
Yeah, English is the official language. Yeah, but because we were colonized by the British, sadly. But we have so Nigeria is like most colonial states. Is problematic because some people just came in and lumped a whole diverse lot of people together just based on the color of their skin, because everybody was black. But they're like different nations in Nigeria. So there's the three major ethnic groups: the Igbos, the Hausas, the Yorubas. Diverse people. Sometimes they have nothing in common. And then there are also about 300 other, ethnicities. And then everybody was lumped together, and then they said, okay, so to make our lives easier, you guys will all speak English. So we've been dealing with that, ever since. We're still dealing with that, And so maybe that's the main background information. And I like that the film delves into, that post-colonial trauma. And so when the British came and the missionaries came, certain aspects of the culture were, like this demonized. So masquerades was one of them. They were like, this is fetish. You should stop that. Go to church. Go and pray. God is the one true, and that's like traumatized a lot of people deeply. Like my dad's generation, his generation, they all have English names. So my dad's name is Ferdinand, his brother's name is Emmanuel, the other one is, and some of these guys didn't go to school, but they have these exotic sort of English names, and many times that's what they are identified with because it was convenient for some people. So we went through those years, which I like that the film brings it out. Went through those years where everything indigenous, everything native was bad. We internalized that it was bad. So sometimes you don't even name your children the name that is indigenous to you. When I was growing up, we were not allowed to speak Igbo at home. We were like all fancy, speak English at all the time, and we thought it was cool, But so it's not but at the language, at the dressing. There's a time you couldn't wear this, it was not cool to wear stuff like this. You had to be in a suit. It didn't matter if you were walking, under the sun. But of maybe the last decade, there's been like a revival, of what it means of identity and origin, and it's been like like the film says, there's no rhythm to it, there's no rhyme to it. It's just like, oh, okay, today let's look at music, let's try to bring back. Tomorrow is like, oh, this language is cool, and it's clumsy, it's messy, but at least it's happening, and that's been interesting to live through.
As a devil's advocate question, is comedy the right genre to attack these questions because you are dealing with exaggeration and stereotypes, or are these issues actually more serious and deeper?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. I think comedy has its uses. Sometimes it makes these things go down lighter. It makes it like a spoonful of sugar, and people don't necessarily like being preached to or being, go back to your roots. Sometimes it's when you make it more fun, which is not to say there's also room for the deeper, meaning. I think there's room for all kinds of expressions, and I wouldn't be the one to tell, filmmaker or whoever how to, express his. So yeah, I think let's have more.
More.
Yeah.
I almost sound like a school teacher when I say I hear some people talking in the audience, and there was already a lot of whispering going on the front row. So I assume if you agree, this would be a good moment to maybe open up the discussion. And do you want to ask a question?
No, my question was if that was us, the whispering.
Okay, I guess so, because you're the front row. Anybody else wants to ask a question? Yes, please.
Understanding question. There's this. Sorry, thank you. There's this group. They try to use the Okoroshi, the ones who want to have him in the east, and the other group. Can you maybe explain what this group is about? So what are these men doing?
Okay. Thank you for your question. So these guys are like cultural preservationists. So they are Igbo guys, one of the major ethnic groups, which is where the Okoroshi comes from. And the Igbos come from the east. Lagos is in the west. But Lagos is like the center of, the economic center of Nigeria. Because of economic opportunities, many Igbos migrate to Lagos, every day, to kind of, get, and when they because they're resourceful, they eventually, make money, build houses in Lagos, and some of them forget that they came from, the east, and they don't go back, so, but no matter how, it's also like a displacement, because the Yorubas who own Lagos more or less will not accept you as one of theirs. So no matter what you do, there's always that reminder that you are from somewhere else. So what the guys were so this like ancestor, came, and everybody agrees that in Igbo culture, the ancestors belong at home. It's why when you die, it doesn't matter if you die in America or wherever, Netherlands, they try as much as possible to take your body back to not Lagos where you lived, but back to the east where you came from. You have to be buried in your ancestral home. So that's what was going on with the Okoroshi. They were trying to take it back to the ancestral home, which is in the east. Does that help? Okay.
I think you guys have been giving a beautiful example of actually how nuance can sort of create maybe micro disagreements. Still, I'm wondering if there's people in the audience that have completely different opinions that I want to test on our esteemed guests, because then now would be the moment. And also, if Abba is still somewhere in the room, maybe not.
He left. Now we can feel it all.
Okay. It was a really bad film, right?
Yes.
But anyway. I have a last comment about the film as well. And about being a comedy genre. I think it like really fits, because again I liked what I liked about the film. One of the things I liked about the film is that like the dilemma, the impossibility of like decolonization, for example, or like you want to reclaim your African roots, traditions, culture, whatsoever, but it's almost impossible to trying to revive them without commodification, so on and so forth. So I like that it's playing with that idea. It's not like solely thing like modernization, Western. Let's forget about, and it's impossible, because let's forget about Western modernization, like global capitalization, whatever, and go back, because and it kind of have like small stories that deals with that as well. For instance, the uncle, like his leg, and the traditional medicine versus modern hospitalization thing. So there are like little stories scattered all around that deal with it, and it's comments. I like that it comments, like it's kind of absurd both ways. So it's kind of a stuck kind of situation, but while doing that, it also accomplishes what it's trying to do, because it revives those masks, creates a different form of art using those. So that's why I kind of appreciate what it's doing. I wanted to add.
Yeah, in that sense it also belongs to a much longer tradition, I think, of cinema from African countries that belong to the post-colonial times, where people like Dibril Diop Mambeti, who did Tuki Buki and Hien, they were sort of dealing in the same way with the tragic events in a kind of absurdistic, maybe that's a better way to say, than comedic.
And so he has so many microaggressions going on in the film, and which is why I feel like I wish he had trusted his audience more, especially towards the end. And
the doctor,
yes,
which explains everything.
I was like, okay, maybe not, yeah, exactly, because throughout the film he's been pointing and we got it. So that whole was not. I'm like, come on, give us some credit, give us some more credit,
Unless a certain type of thinking is already.
Thank you so much.
It's my small contribution. No, I like the ending.
Oh, okay. Because even when you are trying to explain it, he keeps using all this big, jargon, and I guess the people you're trying to explain it to, you kind of even lose them with all those. So I just didn't.
I really read that not as so much as an explanation, but actually as another comment on a certain type of philosophizing, explaining a certain type of literature that's also maybe thriving on this. Anyway, if there are no further questions, I really want to thank you for being with us and giving us a little.
Is there? There is
yes.
I wanted to ask, I know that we wanted to close that topic, but in the end there was this, that you had some options of the end of the film, like the woman could wake up and the story would end with a woman, or the role of the woman in the film, and I wanted to add, the film was as I understand, it was culturally it should be authentic, and also the roles of the people in the film were authentic. So I think that's why it didn't disturb me that the roles of the women were shown exactly as they are, maybe in this society or in this understanding, and. Doing that the director should have maybe changed it. Is it the job of the film to change that? So I just show the society as it is, or do I want to change the end and give more role of the woman, even if it's not like that? You know what I mean?
I vote for the second.
So is it why should it work better? Maybe if I show you the reality, it works more, if you see it's, oh, okay, that's disturbing. Or if I give you the change, oh, let's have this one. Or isn't it mixing the reality? Because it's not the reality.
But reality is not a isolated concept. These films are part of our reality to start with, and the relationship between the real life and the stories is always very much complex and two-way. So I see cinema as more of an inspiration for reality than representation of reality. So I think it creates and affects our reality in a very strong and powerful way. So I'm not really, and this film is not, and especially with a fantastic film like this, I am not into I'm not after authenticity. Yani with particular things, because he's commenting on a cultural aspect, of course it should, but if it also has the grounds to expand and transform and experiment with those things as well, which it does actually with many things. So why not with the gender thing as well? Because I think it's part of the problem is that probably many directors, like male directors, let's say, not in the biological term, but like they don't even probably think, that doesn't come to their minds that this might be a topic kind of thing. That's why we have to bring it up, although we're kind of tired of it sometimes all the time, because it should come up to their minds as if there is something to play with there as well, to transform or change there as well. So that's why, in my opinion. Would you like to disagree?
I hate to agree with you.
There was another question there in the middle.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I don't think, I think you're missing the part where you were talking about who is the center of this story and from what point of view it's narrated, and it's not a completely objective portrayal of society or societal structures. It's like a point of view of one part of society, which in this case was male. And of course, if you would have made a film which centered a female or intersex or non-binary character, it would of course still portray societal structures, but from a different point of view, and it would therefore also have a different perspective. So I don't think that necessarily you will always have to make a male-centered film, or to make a film with a dominant male perspective just to be authentic. But maybe I misunderstood. I just wanted to add that, and I don't think that necessarily every film has to fulfill those roles. I think if someone like Abba Makama makes a film, then it makes sense for him to make a film that portrays the way he sees society, and that's fine, I think.
Okay, thank you so much for last footnote of disagreement here, and also for bringing this up, because these are important issues that we constantly need to keep thinking about. Also, I think this is a wonderful moment to maybe continue the conversation, as we say, at the bar. So thanks to the audience for being here with us and being so attentive, but thanks especially to Senem and Wilfred. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dana.